So this is going to be a quick little one-off project in between some other bigger pieces, mainly because since I've been doing YouTube long enough, people don't really watch videos on a holiday weekend, which is totally justified. I'm not saying people should. So I don't like to post things I'm really excited about on holiday weekends. I don't usually film stuff like this, but because of the reasons aforementioned, I did. And this is basically a guy I've made stuff before. He's a local contractor. He had a column base. It's a 2-part base. One of the pieces was severely compromised. Termites got to this, and he asked for it to be recreated. Now, something like this was most likely made with a shaper, and I do have an unworkable shaper in here, but I don't have any sort of bits or anything to go with it, and they're quite expensive. So I tried to recreate it with router bits I had and then some Dremel tools. Now, full disclosure, I did something I've never done before. I filmed all this on an iPad, and I accidentally deleted about 20 videos of this project and another project by accident. So towards the end of the video, I lost using the router. I'm still going to upload this because, to be perfectly honest, I don't have any other project. If people aren't getting anything from the video because that footage is missing, I'll probably just end up deleting it and calling this one a wash. But essentially, this is what the finished base looks like. Like I said, it's 2 parts. And I made both of them obviously separately, but they match the original pretty well. So luckily I had some Douglas fir laying around the shop. Douglas fir is a decent outdoor grade material, especially if it's going to be painted. And lumber straight from Home Depot is not necessarily ready to work because the relative humidity of it is rather high. But I've had this in the shop for easily 6 months, so it was easy to work with. Now this piece is, one is a little over 12 inches wide and the other one's almost 14 inches. So what I decided to do instead of using a flat plank was rip this to the height I needed for each. I think the total is about 3.5, and then I just cleaned up the edges. This means I have to glue all these together, but if you use a flat plank, not only would it not be wide enough for what I needed it for, but it's going to bow and cup over time. With all of these pieces cut into chunks and then glued together, it should stay fairly flat over time. So all I did was just take the top and bottom off because this is dimensional lumber. It's not super clean. To glue this together, I had some Gorilla Glue laying around the shop. I decided to use this because it's rated a little more waterproof than some of the glues I have in the shop. The key with Gorilla Glue is to wet your surface because it's actually a chemical reaction that makes the glue foam, and to not put too much on there. If you overdo Gorilla Glue, it will sometimes butt your pieces apart. So this is kind of the stack I had, and I could just set this together and then let this set up overnight. So the next day I came in and I just rough sanded the top so it was somewhat flat because I had to cut 2 circles out of this. I'm using a circle cutting jig that I made. It's very simple. You'll see later in the video I don't have anything fancy for it. Now this piece, the circle, was somewhat easy to draw just to get the correct diameter of it. The other one I kind of had to mark the arch and then move it around the piece, lining it up with the arch I already drew in order to get the right dimension on there. But I was able to get the rough circle for that one as well. You can see those are the 2 circles and just how I went about getting that one piece. You can see just how badly the termites attack that piece of lumber. So this is the jig. It's just a straight plank of Luan, a circle cut out, and then I just have a central pivot point based on the radius that I need. So the radius is going to be from the edge of the router bit to where that nail head is. So I could just measure the circle and then put the nail head where I need it to be. I always check because I've used this quite a lot, so there's a couple circles in there, a couple nail holes in there already. But once I got the correct diameter, the correct size on the outside, I could go through and do the whole thing. Now I'm using quite a large bit because this is about 1 5/8 inches thick, and it's the only bit I had that could go to the bottom. If you're using a 1/4 inch bit, this goes a lot faster. With that thicker bit, I went pretty slowly. And then there's the first circle. You can do the exact same thing. Like I said, you're going with the radius. So if this circle, let's say it was 14 inches just for simplicity's sake, you're going with 7 inches from the edge of the router bit to where you put your central pivot point. And then once I had this one I had to shrink a little bit. You could see where the original curve was. It was a little too large. Once again, I could just cut this whole thing in a circle. I have the cord propped up to the ceiling, which makes life a lot easier when you're doing something like this. And then there's the second circle. So to start, I have I'm going to use a round over bit that also has the little groove on the top that creates that groove. It's not going to leave a perfect round over, and that will create that groove up top. This worked out nicely. It was pretty much exactly the bit, give or take a few millimeters. I was not going to go crazy with this, but you could see this first one ended up working out pretty nicely. Then I had to switch over to a rabbeting bit to cut the groove. You can see I have a rabbeting bit that has multiple bearings, but the bit was too thick. So I used a 1/4 inch rabbeting bit with the bearings from the other bit on top. You can change out the bearings and it will give you the exact depth. You could see under the curved part on top, there's a flat section before you get that big cove cut. So that's what I'm cutting here, and like I said, I used the bearings from that set in order to get the depth I needed. And I would just line these bits up with the original to get it to the right height, and then just transfer it to the piece. So I'm cutting that flat part right now. You can see it. Now the original's kind of warped, so it looks a little taller. It's really not, but you can see that I have that flat section now as well. So then in order to cut part of this cove, I'm not going to be able to do the whole thing, but I do have a little bit of a cove cutting bit that I could get in there. It's kind of like a half, and it lines up just about perfectly. Now you could see I have this extended pretty far, so I'm going to be making really light passes. You really shouldn't have these bits extended too far down the piece. And then like I said, you could see I'm making really light cuts. And then after this is where I lose the material. So you can see the basic shape is there. I have the cove, and that top round over just basically needs to be rounded over, and then that is essentially the shape. But you won't see the router work on this. But from just holding it up like this, you can see I basically have the shape that I'm going for. For the other piece, there was also the round over work to be done on the top, and then the entire side was rounded over from that top edge to the bottom. So I started with outing. Once again, this was pretty simple. I could do that round over on the top, and I did that on both sides. Now once I was done with that, I realized there was going to be a lot of more material to remove. You can kind of see what I'm working with here. So I switched over to a chamfering bit. So I put that in the router, and I had to switch the router as well, but you could see the chamfering bit is going to remove just about all that material, and then I could round it over with a sander. So I switched this out to the chamfering bit, and then I also did both sides as well. And I also lost the footage of rounding this over, but you'll see once the chamfer's done, I just have to take the sander. I think I used a belt sander for this, and I just rounded over those two edges. Like I said, it was just those two high spots. I just rounded it over with a sander, super easy. So then to add the detailing on top, I did the exact same thing. I have the same bit, but I'm switching out the bearings. Because of the dimension of this, the bearing that was on the bit, it would have kept it too far away from the piece. So you can see I switched that out, and then I could go do the top. So I have a very small bearing in there in order to get the right depth on that bit. That rabbeting bit I bought with those interchangeable bearings has been super versatile. I change out bearings on bits all the time, especially recreating these older pieces. So you'll see there was quite a jump. That's where I lost the footage. And right now I'm just putting patch on the outside, because since a lot of this is end grain, you're going to have some grooves and stuff in the pine. To fill all of those with patch. When it's a little bit dry, I wait about a half an hour depending on the temperature outside. I take a wet rag and I smooth over the whole thing. So now the outside's sealed, and then the next day I could come in and sand it. Now, like I said, I lost that footage, but I'm going to show you how I recreated that with the bits. For this top one, I just rounded it over with this somewhat abrasive bit I have for my Dremel, and then I just sanded the whole thing. This was pretty self-explanatory, and it looks pretty similar to what the router left over. You can just see how that bit kind of lines up with that. And then for the other one, you could see there's a little bit, the cove is added, and then basically this top bead is what was rounded over. I used the exact same bit on this one edge. You could see I have it kind of settled the way it was, and I just took it all the way down. So it was just on that one edge. Real simple work. On camera, honestly, I wish I still had the photo, but on camera, honestly, it's almost hard to see the material being removed. And then I just have a circle bit that I did on the inside here in order to kind of define that cove. And that was basically what I did to finish these up. And that is the finished piece.